The name of this particular program is Law and Society. Andrew Stevenson is a local criminal defense attorney. He specializes in criminal defense. And I know you can't discuss cases, but you've had, over the past 20 years, I'm sure you've worked some interesting cases.
I've had many interesting cases, yes. Some very high profile and some average, and I do all sorts of defense work.
Part of what you see is the stuff that makes the headlines, but then there's all the other things that we talked about. We're talking about sexting today, and there are things that come to your desk that obviously don't make the headlines, but are just impactful on individuals' lives. And it doesn't just affect those teenagers; it affects their parents, and it affects the family dynamic of, oh my gosh, you were doing what? I mean, there's just a lot of things going on.
It's encountering law enforcement, encountering criminal charges is stressful for the whole family. The parents, the husband, the wife, the children. It is, a lot of times people come to see me in my office, and I kind of say to them, coming to see me is kind of like going to see an oncologist, a cancer doctor. Most people have two questions when they go there. Am I going to die? And if not, how long do I? If so, how long do I have to live? People come to see me, they say, am I going to prison? And if so, for how long? Those are the two questions that they want to know. And I meet with the families. I meet with the whole family. I meet with everybody. And it really is a family process to deal with.
And there are things that are criminal, and then there are things that are just stupid.
Right.
And I want to talk about, before we get to a couple of great stories that you brought in today, the dangers, and if parents don't know what catfishing is, I think they need to really learn, because some of this is not meant to be titillating. It's to be, I call it humiliated or scammed. There
are a large number of scams. I've helped more clients than I ever thought I would deal with scams.
Well, part of it, and part of it is there are those that prey on the lonely people.
There are.
And a lot of this, what we're going to talk about coming up here is there are people that are lonely, that are looking for a boyfriend or girlfriend. They're looking for love, and what looks to be this knight in shining armor that's contacting me turns out to be not what they think it is at all. And
that's a danger for parents. I mean, you really need to monitor and understand what your children, particularly teenage children, are doing, who they're talking to.
Creepers are not necessarily roaming the neighborhood in a white van.
No, not anymore. They are on the internet. They're on the electronics.
Right. So
one of the scams that is kind of works slightly in reverse is, in a typical scenario, a 17, 18-year-old will make contact with a female in the course of conversation about different things. Sometimes they will be offered a picture, and the boy says, sure, send me your picture. And what they receive purports to be a naked picture or a sexually explicit picture. What follows is, about 2 days later, is a call from law enforcement. And law enforcement calls and says, listen, we've had a complaint. The parents come into our law enforcement agency and said that their daughter sent pictures. The father found it. The father became irate. And becoming irate, he smashed a glass on a table and cut his hand and had to go to the emergency room and has severe medical bills. We want you to come to the police station, and it's usually out of state. In fact, the case that I had, they claimed to be out of Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Okay.
And they said, this is Detective Rick Jones. Here's my phone number. Call me back. And when you call, you get a voicemail tree that says that you've reached the Fort Wayne Sheriff Department. Press 1 for records, press 2 if you need to speak with a detective. And when you went through the voicemail, you got to Detective Rick Jones, and you had a voicemail box. You could leave him a message.
But this was not really the Fort Wayne.
Well, the parents didn't know that. The parents at the time believed
it was
real,
right?
And in speaking with them, they informed me that basically they were concerned because when they spoke with the detective, he wanted to meet with them, but also said, if you bring money to pay for the medical bills for the father, we won't press charges.
And because that kid, that 18-year-old had a picture of an underage person on their phone because it was sent to them, allegedly underage, they're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm in possession of child pornography.
And I'm going to prison.
Even though I deleted it, they can find it on my phone.
They can still find it on
exactly.
The phone. So what happened is I actually looked up the actual Fort Wayne Sheriff's Department and called them. And I got the exact same voicemail that the scammers were
so
using.
the scammers basically recorded it off
of the real phone
and then
number.
created the same voicemail tree.
But used a different phone number.
Yeah.
And then I contacted the sheriff's department in Fort Wayne and asked them if they knew that there was 2 Fort Wayne sheriff's departments, and they were surprised to learn that, and took action, and it was shut down pretty quickly.
Wow.
But I get calls like that a lot.
And that's you. How do you know it's not real? I mean, other
You
than
don't. Most people don't.
Well, there were some red flags, and you brought it up.
Money.
Bring money.
Bring money is usually a red flag.
Now, are they actually expecting you to drive to Fort Wayne, or is it? Oh, we can settle this over.
No, they were going to meet. They didn't want to inconvenience them, so they were going to meet halfway.
Okay.
Because they didn't really have a sheriff's office to bring them to.
No,
they didn't. Yeah.
That is that's audacious, but that's exactly what's happening, and you're feeling guilty because all of a sudden, I do have
But I didn't ask for it.
But I didn't ask. Well, but you
didn't. You didn't.
You didn't.
You didn't know exactly what the picture was going to be.
No. Would you like to see a picture of me? And the next thing you know,
there you are.
Yeah, and you're like, ooh, okay. And then that's what happens. And these can be perpetrated on any young stupid kid out there, right? I mean,
they can.
I don't want to say stupid.
18-year-old, 19-year-old, and anyone else. There are a lot of very elaborate scams.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just I'm a prince from Nigeria and I'd like to send you $4 million. There are much more sophisticated and much more elaborate scams.
Andrew, I think to myself, nobody falls for those, right? And I the older adult network here in our area. One of the officers from Lancaster Police brought a tape in of this charming guy that had charmed this little old lady out of tens of thousands of dollars. I'm listening to this thinking, how did this happen?
Right.
But people,
I've had people try to get me, purporting to be barristers from England. Yeah.
Really?
And he told me he was from Manchester, and it just so happened that I'm familiar with the city. So when I asked him where his office was, and he couldn't really tell me the name of the street, he didn't get very far.
Yeah, you start
probing for
throwing it back. Well, and I've had you get those messages that say the IRS is coming after you, and you can always tell because they say the cops are going to come and throw you in jail.
Yeah,
nobody speaks like that except for somebody in Jamaica trying to scam you. Before we move on to Tent City, which is a great story in itself, I want to talk about the Zach Anderson story very briefly. This is a high-profile case of a young man who basically got into trouble.
Zach was, by all accounts, a typical high school senior. He was in the computers, but he was shy. He went on a dating app called Hot or Not. It was the precursor to Tinder. And he went to the adult section because he was 18. In the adult section, he met a girl who told him that he was 17. He traveled 20 miles from the state of Indiana to Michigan.
Crossed over the border.
They went to McDonald's. They eventually wound up having consensual sex. The girl's mother got concerned because she was a little late coming home, called the police. Zach picked her up at her house, took her back to the house, and then went home.
So Zach was trying to be a gentleman.
He was trying to be a gentleman.
And and as far as he knew, she was 17 years old because that's what she told him.
Yes. When he got back, about 2 weeks later, law enforcement came. They asked if he would be willing to come down to the station and answer some questions. Thinking he had nothing to hide, he went down. That was his big mistake.
Which again, if people say, well, if you're innocent, you've got nothing to worry about. No, you do, and that's where that first, before he went, he should have made a call to someone. Someone like you, right?
Someone like me.
Yeah, exactly.
So the police asked him if he had sex. He said yes. He said she was 17. Turns out she wasn't 17. Turns out she was 14. And she had lied. It also turns out, whereas Indiana has an affirmative defense that if you are misled or lied to about the age, it's an affirmative defense, which means you can't be found guilty. Michigan has no such law.
Did this girl admit she lied?
Yes. In fact, the girl and her mother both did not want any charges filed. They wanted nothing done. They said that the girl lied. The boy was polite, respectful. They used contraceptives, and the girl was taking the blame for it.
So even the girl's mother was saying, "We own up to this."
Yes, but the prosecutor wouldn't budge. The prosecutor filed the charges, and they eventually pled guilty in court. And the girl and the mother showed up in court to speak on behalf of Zach Anderson. The judge was having none of it that day. The judge essentially threw the book at Zach. gave him 90 days in jail.
Talked about hookup culture.
Yeah, and the judge says, we live in, I'm sick of this. We live in a culture with meet online, hook up, have sex, and that's it, end of it. So he wanted to make an example. The sad part was that he put him on the sex offender registration for
25 years.
25 years.
This kid's going to be in his 40s before he's off this list.
When Zach got out of jail after 90 days, he couldn't go home because his parents lived within 1,000 feet of a public boat ramp. And his parents had to get him an apartment. Eventually, because of the public outcry in support of Zach and what was happened, they were able to do some resentencing. He's no longer on the sex offender registration.
This case made all the national.
It was a Dateline, Nightline, not Dateline Night.
But this is one of those that. But this is how it can happen.
This is how it can happen. Your child innocently is online. You're unaware of what they're doing. Zach told his parents he was simply going to a buddy's house, drove 20 miles, and the next thing you know,
I'm not going to go, Mom, I'm going to go have intercourse with a girl. That's not,
that's not what they
never say that to
your
parents.
They never say that.
All right, but and again, we remind our listeners that Ohio has some of the strictest laws on this underage stuff. So just take it very seriously. Briefly, let's talk about Tent City in Florida. This is a great story.
Well, I use this in my presentations to explain what life is like on the sex offender registration. It is awful. The famous story goes in Florida that there was a person who was put on probation for a sex offense, and they have restrictions on where they can live. And this individual really didn't want to violate probation. So strangely enough, they went out and they got a job and they did their counseling. And when it came time to find a place to live, they were having some problems. So they went back to the probation department and they said, listen, I realize your restrictions. I can't live within 1,000 feet of a school, a church, a stop sign, a post office box.
All these things.
I'm exaggerating a little bit, but that's... And
anywhere where children might be.
And the probation officer said, well, you're being ridiculous. So they got out a map of the county and they drew circles around. And when they were done, the whole map was covered except for one little section, which was located under a freeway overpass.
Okay.
So he said, I guess you got to go there. So the guy went and bought a tent from Walmart, went out, set his tent up. The next guy that came in on a sex offender registration asked where he could live. The probation department said, well, the only place we know of is under this freeway. Eventually, they had hundreds of people living under this freeway overpass.
This is Dade County, right? Which is a huge
Miami,
county,
Florida.
millions of people.
And then somebody connected to the power lines to get them power, and then they had to bring in, because of the waste issue, porta potties. It got out of control. The city, the residents, the publicity was so negative that they had to figure out how to deal with this. Eventually, the city's solution was they bought an abandoned building within 1,000 feet and opened an after-school program. And then the police came in with riot gear to run them out. Yeah. So being on the sex offender registration is serious business. Sexting can be serious. And if you think you have a problem or your son or daughter has made a bad choice, you need to call representation sooner rather than later.
And I will say, Andrew won't say call him because he's a shy kind of guy. But
Not
I will
shy,
say,
I just it doesn't have to be me. I want you to make sure you have representation.
But if you want to contact Andrew, can you?
I'm on the web at StevensonCriminalDefense.com.
Right.
And my office across from the Common Pleas Courthouse.
Yeah. You got a great
Blue House on the corner.
You got a beautiful, it's a house you've restored into an office. It's
I
gorgeous.
Can't take full credit. My father started practicing law there back in
and your lovely wife is such a beautiful decorator as well.
Yes, we've done a nice job. Yes.
All right. Well, thank you again. This show will be on our website as a podcast. You'll be able to listen to it. There's some great information. If you joined us midway through, give it a listen online. There's some great information here, and we'll see you next month as we run down your top 10
ways you can find yourself in the county jail. Yeah.
Again, it's StevensonCriminalDefense.com if you'd like more information on what Andrew does. And I can say, from listening to him, man, you're a wealth of information.
Thank you, Mark.
We'll see you next.